Valentina Ortiz felt the stagecoach lurch, and it wasn't just the rutted-out road. It was her future, bouncing her toward a dusty little town she'd never heard of to marry a man she'd never met. His name was Ethan Caldwell. She had a single, faded photograph of him tucked in her bag, a man with serious eyes and a jaw set like stone. Her mother called it an opportunity, a fresh start. But as the New Mexico sun bled into the sky behind her, all Valentina felt was the cold grip of an ending. Every creek they crossed, every prairie dog that scattered, was one step further from everything she knew, and one step closer to him. The other passengers, a mix of dusty farmers and tired-looking women, eyed her simple dress and the way she clutched her small leather bag. They could probably smell the fear on her, mingled with the scent of sage and road dust. She tried to sit tall, to look like she belonged on this journey, but her heart was a trapped bird beating against her ribs. Miles turned into hours, and the world outside the window was a blur of brown and green. Just when she thought the shaking of the coach would tear her apart, they pulled into a small way station. A single wooden building with a crooked sign that read, "Rest Stop." The driver grumbled something about the horses, and the passengers spilled out into the afternoon heat, stretching their stiff limbs. Valentina stepped down, her legs unsteady on the solid ground. And that's when she saw him. He wasn't a farmer or a traveler. He wore a long coat despite the heat, a hat pulled low, and a silver star pinned to his chest. His eyes, sharp and clear, scanned the coach, the driver, the passengers, and then they landed on her. This was Sheriff Josiah Mercer, the law in these parts, and he moved with a purpose that made the air around him feel still. He questioned the driver, his voice low and calm. He nodded at the other passengers. Then he walked over to Valentina, stopping a few feet away. A kind smile touched his lips, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. Those eyes were doing something else. They were reading her. "Traveling alone, miss?" he asked, his voice smoother than she expected. She managed a nervous nod. He seemed to see right through her practiced calm, right down to the terrified girl underneath. He noticed the slight tremble in her hands, the way she kept glancing down the road toward her unknown fate. He invited her to sit by the small fire inside the way station, and she found herself accepting before she'd even thought about it. The warmth of the flames felt good. He poured 2 cups of coffee, the dark, rich smell a small comfort in a world of uncertainty. They sat in silence for a moment. Then he asked where she was headed. When she told him Juniper Flats, and why, his expression didn't change. But something flickered in his eyes. A flash of... what was it? Pity? Concern? He listened as she explained the arrangement to marry Ethan Caldwell, to build a new life. He spoke about the town, telling her stories of its wild past and its quiet present. His words were a balm, and for a few minutes, she almost forgot she was a piece of mail being delivered to a stranger. As the sun began to dip low, the driver called out that they were leaving. Valentina stood and thanked the sheriff for his kindness. He tipped his hat. "Good luck in Juniper Flats, Miss Ortiz," he said, and then he wished her well. The stagecoach rolled away, kicking up a cloud of dust. But Valentina's mind wasn't on the road ahead. It was on the man she'd just left behind. How had he known her name? She had never told him. The wheels of the coach churned on, carrying her deeper into a mystery she hadn't even known existed. Something was wrong in Juniper Flats, and she was riding right into the heart of it. The town of Juniper Flats appeared out of the dust like a half-forgotten memory. Wooden buildings slumped against each other, their signs faded by the relentless sun. General store, blacksmith, saloon. Old men in rocking chairs watched the stagecoach roll in, their eyes missing nothing. This was it. The end of the line. Valentina's heart hammered against her ribs as she stepped onto the main street. The air was thick with the smell of manure and wood smoke. For a long, silent moment, she just stood there, a lone figure in a strange land. No one came for her. There was no welcoming party, no smiling fiancé, just the whisper of the wind and the stares of the locals. Then, a man emerged from the shadows of the stable. He was tall, built strong like an oak tree, and his face was a mask of grim determination. It was him. Ethan Caldwell, the man from the photograph. He walked toward her, his boots kicking up little puffs of dust. He stopped, looked her up and down as if she were a horse he was thinking of buying, and then, barely tipping his hat, he said her name. Just her name. Valentina. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. An acknowledgement of a package received. She managed a small, polite smile, but it felt brittle, like it might shatter. Ethan didn't smile back. His voice was flat, devoid of any emotion. He had chores to do at the ranch, he said. There was a room for her at the boarding house. She was to follow him. He turned and started walking, not once looking back to see if she was there. It was like walking next to a ghost. The boarding house was run by a woman named Mrs. Prudence Bellamy, a woman as sharp and spare as a needle, but with a surprising kindness in her eyes. She showed Valentina to a small room upstairs with a narrow bed and a single window overlooking the desolate hills. It was clean, but it felt more like a cell than a bedroom. Later, as she unpacked the few things she owned, she watched the town from that window. She saw life happening down below, kids playing, women shopping, men talking, but she felt completely separate from it all, like a ghost watching a world she couldn't touch. The next day, Ethan took her to the ranch. It was miles out of town, a lonely house on a vast, windswept plain. Chickens scattered as they approached, and a dog barked from the porch. There she met his younger sister, Maybelle. Maybelle was a whirlwind of cheerful energy, a stark contrast to her brother's suffocating silence. She chattered away, her smile never fading, but there was something frantic about it, something practiced. Valentina tried to make herself useful. She collected eggs, she swept floors, she helped Maybelle cook. But Ethan remained a stone wall. He worked from dawn until dusk, his hands always busy, his eyes always focused on something in the distance. He'd eat his meals without saying a word, then disappear back into the fields. Valentina wasn't just a guest in his house. She was an inconvenience, and the townspeople noticed. Their whispers followed her like a shadow. "Too soft for ranch life," they'd say as she passed the general store. "Reads too many books," they'd mutter outside the saloon. Ethan Caldwell made a mistake. Each word was a tiny paper cut on her soul. She held her head high, but she was bleeding inside. One afternoon, seeking refuge from the whispers and the silence, she sat on a bench outside the boarding house, a book open on her lap. She wasn't reading. She was just trying to breathe. A shadow fell over her. She looked up into the steady eyes of Sheriff Josiah Mercer. He tipped his hat, that same small, unreadable smile on his face. He asked if she was settling in. He asked if she missed home. Her voice cracked when she said yes. He didn't press. He just stood there, a solid, calming presence in her chaotic new life. Then he mentioned the river trail, a peaceful walk just outside of town. He offered to show it to her sometime. Valentina thanked him, her heart giving a strange little flutter. She watched him walk away, his back straight, his steps measured. That night, she lay in her narrow bed, thinking about the two men who defined her existence here. Ethan, the man who was supposed to be her future, who treated her like a stranger. And Josiah, the man who was supposed to be a stranger, who made her feel seen. Something was terribly wrong here. One man was a wall of ice, the other was a slow-burning fire. And she was trapped between them, with no idea which one would burn her first. The days bled into one another, each one a copy of the last. A sunrise, chores at the ranch, Ethan's silence, the town's whispers, a sunset. Valentina felt like she was trapped in a play where she was the only one who didn't know her lines. Ethan would bring supplies to the boarding house, flour, eggs, soap, placing them on the porch like offerings to a restless spirit. He was always polite, always distant. He'd ask if she needed anything, but his eyes would already be looking past her, down the road, as if he couldn't wait to escape. She began to suspect it wasn't just duty that made him send for her. It was something else, something that scared him. One afternoon, Mrs. Bellamy asked her to check on a newborn foal in the stable out back. The little thing was all legs and trembling, a white star on its forehead. But it was weak. Its breathing was shallow, its eyes dull. It couldn't stand. A jolt of panic, then purpose, shot through Valentina. She remembered things her uncle, a horseman, had taught her. She grabbed a bucket and a blanket and got to work, whispering softly to the foal, trying to coax life back into its fragile body. She was so focused she didn't hear the footsteps behind her. "Having some trouble?" a low voice asked. It was Sheriff Mercer. He was holding a jar of oats, his expression calm and unhurried. It was as if he'd known she would be there, as if he'd been waiting. He didn't hover or offer useless advice. He listened as she explained what was wrong, his eyes sharp and attentive. Then he knelt beside her in the straw. "Here," he said, handing her a clean cloth. "Let's get him warm." They worked together as the sun went down, their movements in sync, a silent understanding passing between them. He told her she had a gift with animals. She felt a blush creep up her neck. They lit a lantern, casting a warm, golden glow over the stable. The world outside fell away. It was just the two of them, the mother horse and the struggling foal. He started talking about his past, about the ranch he grew up on. He told her about his younger brother, how he had loved horses more than anything. He said his brother had died during a bad winter years ago. Valentina saw a flicker of profound sadness in his eyes, a shadow that the lantern light couldn't chase away. But she also saw strength, a deep, quiet resolve. For the first time since she'd arrived, she felt completely safe. But then, a new thought, cold and sharp, cut through the warmth. How had his brother died? He'd been so specific about everything else, but on that one point, he'd been vague. It was just a bad winter. That didn't feel right. The next time Ethan came to town, his face looked even more haggard than usual. Valentina, feeling a strange new confidence after saving the foal, told him about it. She told him how the sheriff had helped her, how they'd worked through the night. The moment the sheriff's name left her lips, Ethan's eyes turned to chips of ice. He didn't say a word. He just gave a slow, deliberate nod, the muscles in his jaw tight. He was angry. No, it was more than that. He was afraid. He invited her to dinner at the ranch a few days later. Maybelle was her usual bubbly self, the table was laden with food, but the air was so thick with tension you could have cut it with a knife. Ethan ate in silence, his gaze fixed on his plate. After the meal, he walked her back to town. The silence between them stretched and stretched until Valentina couldn't take it anymore. "Are you angry with me?" she asked, her voice small. He stopped in the middle of the dusty street. He looked up at the moon, then finally, he looked at her. "People are talking," he said, his voice rough. "They see you with the sheriff all the time." His eyes searched her face. "I'm not sure you're cut out for this life, Valentina. Maybe this was a mistake." The words hit her like stones. She stood there stunned, the injustice of it stealing her breath. She had done nothing wrong. She had tried to connect with him, to be the partner he supposedly wanted. She told him the sheriff was just a friend, that she was lonely, that she had come all this way to build a life with him. Ethan just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then he gave that same slow nod, turned on his heel, and walked away, leaving her alone in the dark. Back in her room, Valentina couldn't stop the thoughts from swirling. Ethan's coldness wasn't about dislike. It was about the sheriff. Why was he so afraid of the town's lawmen? And the sheriff. His kindness felt like a carefully constructed wall. What was he hiding behind it? What really happened to his brother? The next morning, she went to the stable. The foal was on its feet, stronger than ever. A few minutes later, Josiah arrived with a brush. As they groomed the horses, he told her something strange. He said that when an animal trusts you, it means they see something good in you, something pure. He looked right at her when he said it, and she felt like he was talking about more than just horses. Later that day, she overheard two old men talking outside the general store. They were speaking in low tones, but she caught a few words. Another hard winter for the Caldwells. And, since the Mercer boys' accident. The word shot through her like a bullet. The sheriff hadn't said his brother died in an accident. He'd said he died during a bad winter. It was a lie, a small one, but a lie nonetheless. Valentina's blood ran cold. The Caldwells. The Mercer boys' accident. The two families were connected. Her future husband's family and the family of the kind, watchful sheriff. This wasn't a love triangle. It was something far older and far more dangerous. She wasn't just caught between two men. She was caught in a web of secrets and lies that had been spun long before she ever set foot in Juniper Flats. And she had a terrible feeling that the web was about to be torn apart. The sky over Juniper Flats turned a bruised purple, the clouds gathering for a fight. A storm was coming. Valentina could feel it in her bones, a restless energy that mirrored the turmoil in her own heart. She stood at her window, watching the wind whip the dust into frantic spirals. She was done waiting, done being a pawn in a game she didn't understand. She had to know the truth. She found Ethan at the ranch, desperately trying to secure a loose barn door against the rising wind. His face was a thundercloud, his movements frantic. She didn't wait for an invitation. She walked right up to him, the wind tearing at her dress. "What happened to the sheriff's brother?" she demanded, her voice rising above the howl of the wind. Ethan froze. He stared at her, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and fear. "You stay out of that," he growled, turning back to the door. But she wouldn't let it go. "The townspeople call it an accident," she pressed. "Josiah just said it was a bad winter. Why are you all lying?" "It's not your concern," he yelled, slamming the bar across the door. "My only concern is this ranch." And that was it. That was the crack in the wall. It wasn't about her. It was never about her. It was about the ranch. "This marriage," she said, the realization dawning on her, cold and ugly. "It's not about finding a wife, is it? It's about this land." Ethan's shoulders slumped in defeat. The fight went out of him, replaced by a deep, weary sadness. He finally looked at her, and she saw the terrified, cornered man he truly was. The ranch was failing. His father had left him with a mountain of debt, a debt held by one man, Silas Croft, the town banker. Croft owned nearly everything and everyone in Juniper Flats. He was squeezing the life out of the Caldwell ranch, and Ethan was drowning. Her dowry, the money her family had sent with her, was his last desperate hope. It was a business transaction. She was the price to save his family's legacy. He hadn't been cold because he disliked her. He'd been cold because he was ashamed. Ashamed to have bought a bride, ashamed to drag her into his ruin. And his fear of Sheriff Mercer? It was because Josiah was the only one in town who wasn't afraid of Silas Croft. He was always watching, always asking questions. Ethan was terrified the sheriff would uncover the truth about the debt and stop the marriage, sealing the ranch's fate. The rain began to fall, thick, heavy drops that splattered in the dust around them. The truth hung in the air between them, more powerful than the coming storm. Valentina felt a wave of pity for this broken man. But pity wasn't enough. Not anymore. She left him standing there in the rain and ran. She didn't know where she was going at first, her feet just pounding against the muddy ground. But then she knew. There was only one person she could go to. The sheriff's office was dark except for a single lamp casting a pool of golden light on his desk. He was sitting there, staring at a map on the wall, a map of the county with certain properties circled in red. One of those red circles was around the Caldwell Ranch. She burst through the door, soaked and breathless. He looked up, his expression unreadable. "It's Silas Croft," she gasped. "The banker. Ethan is in debt to him. The marriage. It was all for the money to pay him off." Josiah Mercer didn't move. He just watched her, his eyes dark and intense. The kind, gentle sheriff was gone. In his place was a man made of iron and shadow. He stood up slowly. "I know," he said, his voice a low growl. And then, he told her everything. Silas Croft wasn't just a banker. He was a predator. For years, he'd been systematically destroying the ranchers in the valley, creating debts they could never repay, then swooping in to buy their land for pennies on the dollar. He was building an empire on the ruins of other men's dreams. And his brother? It was no accident. His brother had discovered what Croft was doing. He'd gathered evidence, ready to expose him. But Croft found out. He arranged an accident during a winter storm. A fallen tree, a spooked horse. No witnesses, no proof. Just a grieving family and a banker who offered his deepest sympathies. Josiah had known it was murder from the start, but he could never prove it. He'd become sheriff for one reason: to wait for the day he could bring Silas Croft to justice. He'd been watching the Caldwells, knowing they were Croft's next victims. His kindness to Valentina hadn't been an act of friendship. It was an investigation. He needed to know what her role was in all this. He had to be sure she wasn't a part of Croft's scheme. The storm raged outside, the thunder shaking the small building. Valentina stared at him, her mind reeling. She had stumbled into a war, a quiet, hidden war for the very soul of this town. And Silas Croft, the smiling, respectable banker she'd seen tipping his hat to the ladies on Main Street, was the monster at the center of it all. "The storm," Josiah said, his eyes fixed on the window, where lightning split the sky. "He'll use this as cover. He'll make his move on the ranch tonight. He'll think no one can stop him." Valentina looked at the sheriff, at the grim determination etched on his face, and she knew he was right. But she also knew something else. Croft was wrong. There was someone who could stop him. She wasn't a mail-order bride anymore. She wasn't a victim. She was a witness. And the storm that was supposed to be Croft's cover was about to become his undoing. "What are we going to do?" Valentina asked, her voice steady despite the thunder that rattled the windows. This was no longer about her broken engagement or her lonely heart. This was about justice. A cold fire ignited in Josiah's eyes. "We're going to end this. Tonight." The plan was simple, desperate, and incredibly dangerous. Croft would send his hired men to the ranch under the cover of the storm, likely to start a fire or cause some accident that would force Ethan to default on his loan immediately. They would walk into a trap. Josiah deputized Valentina on the spot, his hand resting on her shoulder for a brief, steadying moment. He gave her a spare revolver. It was heavy and cold in her hands, a terrifying piece of metal that felt like the weight of the world. They rode out to the ranch, the wind and rain lashing at them, turning the world into a churning chaos of darkness and water. They found Ethan in the barn, sitting on a hay bale, a rifle across his lap, his face pale in the lantern light. He looked up as they entered, a flicker of surprise followed by a grim resignation. He knew why they were there. There was no time for apologies or explanations. Josiah laid out the plan in sharp, concise sentences. For the first time, Valentina saw Ethan not as a coward, but as a man trapped by circumstances, now being offered a single, terrifying chance to fight back. He looked from Josiah to Valentina, and in that moment, some of his father's strength returned to his eyes. He nodded. "This is my home," he said, his voice hoarse. "He's not taking it." Mabel was hiding in the root cellar. Safe. The three of them took up positions in the small ranch house, dousing all the lanterns except one in the main room. It was their bait. They waited. The only sounds were the howling of the wind, the drumming of the rain on the roof, and the frantic beating of Valentina's own heart. Every creak of the floorboards, every shutter banging in the wind, sent a jolt of adrenaline through her. It felt like hours. Then, through the storm, came a new sound. The splintering of wood. The front door shuddered as something heavy slammed against it. Once, twice. On the third blow, the lock shattered and the door flew open, revealing two hulking figures silhouetted against the stormy night. They were carrying lanterns and axes. They weren't here to talk. The first man stepped inside, shaking the rain from his coat. "Caldwell!" he boomed. "Mr. Croft sent us. Time to pay your bill." From the shadows, Josiah's voice cut through the air, cold as steel. "His account's been settled." The man spun around, his eyes wide with shock, just as Josiah's fist connected with his jaw. The second man raised his axe, but Ethan was faster, tackling him from the side, sending them both crashing over the dinner table. The house exploded into a whirlwind of desperate violence. A lantern was knocked over, the flames sputtering dangerously close to a curtain. Valentina, her heart in her throat, didn't hesitate. While the men were locked in a brutal struggle, she grabbed a heavy water pitcher and doused the flame, plunging the room into near darkness. The move was so unexpected it gave them a precious second of confusion. That's when she saw it. A third man, slinking in through the broken door, a pistol in his hand, aiming it straight at Josiah's back. She didn't have time to think. She raised the heavy revolver, both hands shaking, and screamed, "Josiah!" He spun around just as she pulled the trigger. The sound was deafening, the kickback sending a shockwave up her arm. She missed. The bullet splintered the door frame inches from the gunman's head, but it was enough. The man flinched, his own shot going wide, and it gave Josiah the opening he needed. He launched himself at the gunman, and the fight was over in seconds. They tied the three men up, their faces a mixture of fury and disbelief. They hadn't expected a fight. They certainly hadn't expected a sheriff. And they definitely hadn't expected the mail-order bride to be the one who saved him. Just as the storm began to subside, a buggy pulled up outside. A portly, well-dressed man stepped out, holding an umbrella against the lingering drizzle. He walked to the doorway, a smug, self-satisfied smile on his face. It was Silas Croft, the banker, come to survey his new property. He peered into the dark room. "Is it done?" he asked, his voice dripping with arrogance. "Oh, it's done, Silas," Josiah said, stepping into the light of Croft's lantern, his own pistol now aimed squarely at the banker's chest. The color drained from Croft's face. He saw his three men, bound and beaten on the floor. He saw Ethan Caldwell, standing tall and defiant. And then he saw Valentina, holding a revolver, her eyes blazing with a fire he had never imagined. He had underestimated them all. "Sheriff Mercer," he stammered, trying to regain his composure. "What is the meaning of this? These men were simply helping a neighbor in distress." "The only one in distress here is you, Silas," Josiah said calmly. "Attempted arson, assault, conspiracy to commit murder. I think that's enough to see you hang." Croft's arrogance crumbled, replaced by pure, pathetic terror. He had walked right into the trap. The war was over. As Josiah led the banker away in cuffs, the first rays of dawn were breaking through the clouds. The rain had washed the world clean. Valentina stood on the porch, the cold metal of the gun still in her hand, and watched the sunrise. She had come to Juniper Flats expecting to be a wife. Instead, she had become a warrior. And in the quiet aftermath of the storm, a new, unfamiliar feeling began to bloom in her chest. It wasn't fear, or loneliness, or anger. It was peace. The town of Juniper Flats woke up to a story that was wilder than any prairie storm. The arrest of Silas Croft sent shockwaves through the community. The monster who had been living among them, smiling and tipping his hat while he bled them dry, was finally caged. People emerged from their homes, gathering in small, hushed groups, looking at the sheriff's office with a mixture of awe and disbelief. The whispers that had once followed Valentina down the street were replaced with looks of respect. She was no longer the soft girl from the stagecoach. She was the woman who had stood with the sheriff, the woman who had faced down Silas Croft's men. At the ranch, the air was different. The heavy cloak of fear and shame had been lifted. Ethan Caldwell looked like a different man. The lines of stress on his face had softened. He moved with a new purpose, a lightness in his step. He and Valentina sat at the kitchen table, a pot of coffee steaming between them. Maybelle was there too, her cheerful smile finally reaching her eyes. It was genuine now, free from the frantic energy of before. Ethan looked at Valentina, his gaze direct and clear for the first time. "I owe you everything," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "My home, my life. I brought you here under false pretenses. I treated you poorly because I was too much of a coward to face my own failure. You deserve better than that." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, hand-carved wooden box. Inside was a simple ring, whittled from a piece of dark cherry wood. "I made this for you when I first received your letter," he said softly. "But I never deserved to give it to you. You are free, Valentina. Free to go wherever you want, to build a life you choose." Valentina looked at the ring, then back at him. She saw not the cold stranger she had met, but a good man who had been pushed to the brink. A man who was now, finally, free himself. She gently closed the lid of the box and pushed it back across the table. "Thank you, Ethan," she said, a real smile touching her lips. "I hope you and Maybelle build something wonderful here." Their partnership was over, but it ended not with bitterness, but with a quiet mutual respect. They had survived the storm together, and it had changed them both. That evening, as the sky turned to shades of orange and pink, there was a soft knock on the door of the boarding house. It was Josiah. He wasn't wearing his sheriff's star. He was just a man, his shoulders relaxed, the shadows gone from his eyes. He asked if she wanted to take a walk. They walked in comfortable silence, down the main street, past the church, and out to the edge of town where the prairie opened up, vast and endless under the twilight sky. The air was cool and smelled of rain-soaked earth. They stood there for a long time, just watching the stars begin to appear, one by one. "I spent years living with a ghost," Josiah said, his voice quiet. "Planning my revenge, waiting for my moment. I thought justice for my brother was the only thing that mattered." He turned to look at her, his eyes full of a warmth she had only glimpsed before. "Then you arrived, and you reminded me that there's more to life than settling old scores. There's kindness, there's courage, there's new beginnings." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It wasn't a warrant or a legal document. He unfolded it to reveal a hand-drawn map. It showed a small plot of land by a creek, just a little ways out of town, with a square drawn on it labeled House. "I bought this land a long time ago," he said. "Always thought one day I might build a home here, a place with a big porch to watch the sunset from. But a house isn't a home if there's no one to share it with." He looked at her, his heart in his eyes. "I know you came here looking for a home, Valentina. I never thought I'd be the one who might be able to give you one." Tears welled in Valentina's eyes. She thought of her long journey, of the fear and the loneliness. She thought she was traveling to a life that had been chosen for her. But she was wrong. Every step, every challenge, every moment of terror and bravery had been leading her here. To this man. To this moment. She wasn't a mail-order bride. She was the master of her own fate, and her fate was standing right in front of her. A few weeks later, the whole town gathered on that plot of land by the creek. Chairs were set out in the grass, wildflowers were tied to the fence posts, and Mrs. Bellamy had baked enough pies to feed an army. Valentina stood under a cottonwood tree, her dress simple but beautiful, the prairie wind gently lifting her hair. Josiah stood beside her, his hand holding hers, his smile wide and true. There were no grand promises, just simple words spoken from the heart. To care for one another. To build something honest and good together. As the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, a cheer went up from the crowd. Even the foal, now a strong young colt, tethered nearby, tossed its head and gave a happy whinny. The girl who had ridden into town lost and alone had found more than she had ever dreamed of. She had found her strength, she had found her voice, and in the heart of a quiet sheriff, she had found her home. As the sun set, they walked toward the spot where their new house would stand, hand in hand, the endless prairie stretching out before them like a beautiful, unbroken promise. Thank you for joining us on this journey to Juniper Flats. If you enjoyed Valentina's story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for more tales of courage, justice, and the untamed heart of the West. Your support allows us to keep telling stories that matter. Until next time, stay brave and keep fighting for your own happy ending.